I'm glad y'all could make it today. During the next hour, I'm going to show you all the basic skills you need to know to create your own Windows business applications with Objectvision. And along the way, you'll see why it is that we say Objectvision is the easiest way to create Windows applications. Now, I know you're all familiar with First Look, which came with your copy of Objectvision, but I'd like to take a moment now to recommend that you spend a few moments going through it. It's really a great introduction to Objectvision, and it'll help you get started and accelerate your pace through these lessons. Let's begin with an overview of Objectvision, what it is, who it's for, and what you can do with it. Objectvision, for the first time, enables non-programmers to create their own Windows business applications. And for experienced developers, they can create Windows applications much faster and easier. Objectvision uses visual programming, which combines the benefits of the graphical user environment in Windows with object-oriented technologies that have been developed by Borland to provide a very powerful development environment.
What do you mean by non-programmers?
Anyone who knows Windows and has the ability to master a simple spreadsheet can learn to use Objectvision. And the easy-to-use tools are also very powerful, which enables anyone to create very broad range of business applications. And these same visual tools also allow us to connect to some of the most advanced capabilities offered by Windows. Things like Dynamic Data Exchange, or DDE, Object Linking and Embedding, or OLE, Dynamic Link Libraries, or DLLs. Objectvision applications can also directly connect to databases in Paradox, DBase, and btree formats. We like to say that application creation with Objectvision is as easy as ABC because Objectvision has 3 independent design elements that are all you need to complete your application. And the whole process is done completely visually without having to write any lines of programming code at all. The first is the application interface, modeled after a familiar business form. You design that interface by using Objectvision's visual design tools to directly manipulate objects on the screen. The second is the creation of your application's logic using decision trees like these to express your business rules. Objectvision uses decision trees both to calculate values and to manage events and actions. And the third element is Objectvision's powerful connectivity to data and other applications, which you can control with the same visual programming techniques. So Objectvision is truly unique. Nothing else offers anything like its visual programming using decision trees. Nothing else lets you create powerful data-connected applications without writing any lines of code. And there's one more unique feature of Objectvision I'd like to mention, and that's intelligent prompting. Intelligent prompting is a feature of Objectvision that guides the user through completion of the form, automatically prompting for required information and automatically skipping the unnecessary fields. A little later I'll show you how that actually works, but for now the best way to appreciate Objectvision is to see it in action. So let's take a look right now. First, let's launch Objectvision. And now we'll take a look at an application that's already been created. For your practice and review, the material in this lesson is covered in Chapter 3 of Getting Started. And there's our application. This is our order entry form. As we'll see shortly, our application also has a second form for customer information. Well, there's actually 4 links in this application. The first is for the sales order header over here. The second is for the Bill To, Ship To section. The third is a one-to-many link for the items on each order. And the fourth retrieves part descriptions and prices. So let's get down to business. Let's make this order number 7 and press enter. And we see a simple case of intelligent prompting here. When the order first appeared, Objectvision automatically filled in today's date for us. And the cursor has now moved on to the next field, asking for the name of our contact. And then the prompt moves on to phone. Notice that this field shows us a predefined format for the information we enter. Fields like this are called picture fields. They define the format for the field. If we type in an invalid character, we're signaled to provide valid information. And here we can also provide an extension number. And now we're prompted for the name of the company we're going to bill this order to. Notice that a list appears showing us the names of the companies we've stored in our database. This special kind of field is known as a selection list field. It won't allow us to enter a new value. We can only select from the existing items. Today, however, we've decided to do business with a new company. Any suggestions on how we might do that?
Well, you got a button at the bottom that says New Customer. Couldn't you click that?
That's a great idea, and it's logical too. As I said from the beginning, one way end users benefit from Windows is through applications that are easy to use. So in designing this one, we made sure the button called New Customer actually has something to do with new customers. Let's try it out. And the result is that a new form appears, one designed for entering new customer information. So we start out with a field for the name of the company to bill. This company name box does allow us to enter new information, but it also has a facility for viewing companies already in the database. It's that arrow button on the end. Because of this dual function, a box like this is known as a combo box. Let's enter the name of our new customer. And the department should be purchasing and so on. Notice that the field for state will only accept a 2-letter abbreviation, and that's everything. Now we press enter, a new box appears. And here's another example of intelligent prompting. This special box is called a scratchpad prompt because it appears without being a visible part of the form. It's asking us if our shipping information is the same as our billing information, which of course is often the case. And it is the case for our new customer, and now as a result, our ship to area is automatically filled in for us. And that brings us down to the next area of our form, the customer type section. An interesting example of intelligent prompting occurs in this section. We check in user, and let's indicate that Application Industries is a tax-exempt organization. The result is that we're automatically prompted to fill in that important tax-exempt number we need in that case. If we don't click the tax-exempt box, notice how our intelligent prompting just automatically bypasses the tax number field. That takes us to the buttons on the bottom. We're satisfied with our new information, so let's click Enter, which enters our new customer into the database. And finally, click Return to Order Entry to return to our original form. And there's our new customer filled in for us on the entry form. Now all that remains is to sell these people some equipment. Notice the high degree of automation built into our forms as we do this. So let's fill in item number 1. Our part number is 100 and the quantity. And the result is that all the relevant information on that part, a computer system unit, the price, the discount, and the remaining fields down to tax and shipping are all automatically calculated and filled in for us. Now let's enter a second item. Notice when we pressed enter on the last column of the first row, as you'd expect, Objectvision's prompting moves us to the first column of the next row. Also notice over here that the row pointer has moved down to the second row. It's telling us that this is now the current or the active row, and we fill in the information, the item number, the part number, and
When you're filling in the information like that, what if you don't have the part number memorized?
that's a good question. You could look up the part numbers, but there's really a better way. And so there's an enhancement I'd like to show you after we've built our application and have it fully working, but we're going to save that till a little later on in the lesson. Okay then, for now, our order's all ready to go. To conclude, just click the Enter Order button, and finally click the New Order button to clear the form for some new work. This time we'll fill in the number of another existing order, order number 6. And there it is, all filled out automatically for our review. Note that the rows are now filled in. In fact, we've got more than these items in this order, and here's how we view them. Just click the up and down arrows to scroll through the list. Notice, incidentally, that our shipping, tax, and total boxes at the bottom always reflect the complete figures for the entire order, even if all the items aren't visible at a given moment. I've just shown you an example of an Objectvision business application that utilizes just a few of its powerful features. It's designed to make the user's job both easy and intuitive. The next step is to show you just how easy it is to design and build this very application, and that's what we're going to do next. Well, great. Now we've just seen what our goal is, and that's to produce the two forms in the order application we've just demonstrated. And that means producing the two forms that make up that application, the order entry form and the customer's form. Now, as you remember, the first step in creating an application is to build our application interface. That's the A stage in the ABC of Objectvision. For business purposes, the metaphor for that interface is the familiar business form. Let's do that now. We've just launched Objectvision, and we'll start by going to the Tools menu and opening up the Forms tool to design the interface, and type in a name for the form, say Order. Notice the status word Edit in the title bar telling us we're in the Form tool. Now let's just resize the form to full screen. Okay, in our runtime demo a moment ago, we used a variety of different objects that were on the forms. We're going to start placing those objects on our new order form now, since we're no longer in runtime, but in the Form tool. We can find them here in the object bar. Incidentally, the object bar is an important productivity enhancement. It gives you quick access to appropriate and frequently used items you can also find in the menu bar. So here we've got fields, buttons, tables, text, square and rounded rectangles, lines, and imported graphics, and so on, with an icon for each type giving you convenient alternatives to the menu items. At the same time, there are other items, for example, edit, view, grid, and ruler, and so on, that are better dealt with only in the menu bar. So what's first?
The field for order number?
Right. That's the first field on the form, so let's click here to select the field icon. Now let's name it Sales Order, and then move the pointer over here where we'll place the field on the form, stretching it to size. And there it is, labeled and in place. Next, let's add the contact name field. We follow the same steps to create all the fields on the upper right. Here's how it looks when it's finished. These are what we call basic fields. Each includes a label and a place to enter text or a value. We specify the kind of information the field accepts and how it's going to display it by defining the field type. For example, let's select this last field, Date. First, we'll click the right mouse button to get our property inspector, which shows us the choices. We can do this for any object on a form. We select Field Type, and then choose Date Time under the numeric column. And here we select the date time format for how the field will display the date. We can also change the background color of the top two fields to yellow by right-clicking on the first one and selecting that color. To do exactly the same thing to the next field, I just press F4, which is the shortcut key that allows us to repeat an operation. Now, once again, I'd like to point out how easy and powerful this strategy is. The combination of the object bar and the property inspector we're now using is an important innovation provided in all of Borland's Windows products. This process is pretty much the same for all of the fields at the top of the form. Incidentally, this whole topic, how to define fields, is covered at the beginning of Chapter 5, Getting Started Manual. Take a look at this chapter when you're designing your own applications and for practice in defining fields. And while we're at it, there's another reference I'd like to point out that's real useful when you're designing an application. Chapter 2 of the reference guide on design preparation. Take a look at Figure 2.2. It shows you all of the objects available in Objectvision and the properties that can go with each one. Here in this column are all the properties you can use when you're defining a field. Back to our order form, there's one field in this area we just created that's a little bit unusual. To display phone numbers properly, we use a special kind of field called a picture field. Picture fields display information according to a particular format that we define. For phone numbers, that means we need parentheses for the area code, which is 3 digits, which we indicate with number symbols, then 3 more digits, a dash, and 4 more digits. Now our phone number field will accept phone numbers and prompt us if we input the wrong kind of information. Now, of course, we want a professional look. So as you remember, our form has a graphic logo and text up at the top that says International Computer Limited. The steps for adding these text and graphic objects are all explained at the end of Chapter 4 in Getting Started. For now, I'm just showing you the final effect so we can move on. What I want to move on to is the next section of the order entry form, because here we have a different kind of formatting. Let's take a look. The basic fields we were just discussing all include a label and a space for entering a value. Here, in our Bill To and Ship To areas, we need a different treatment. We may have to bill one address and ship to another, so we need to allow different information to be entered, even though the names of the fields appear to be the same. To accomplish this, we put a text label to the left, like company here, or department attention here, and then we put the field for entering the information right next to it on the same line. Does anybody see anything else different?
Well, yeah, that means you've got to get rid of the label in each field so it's just blank.
Great, that's true. In fact, what we'll be doing is concealing the label. So let's see how we do that now. Okay, to start with, the formats of these two areas are basically the same. So we'll define the Bill To area first, and then later we'll copy it over to the right and edit it to create our Ship To area. Here we go. First, let's create the text objects and place them on the form. Here's our heading, Bill To. And I'll use the property inspector to remove the outline border. And now company goes here. And then department attention, and so on. Here's the completed result. Now we'll select the field icon on the object bar and create the first field, placing it right next to the text company. We do the same for each field. Finally, we want to select all these fields in a group. We can do that easily by pressing Control and clicking to select discontiguous fields, or by pressing Shift and clicking once, as we're doing here, when they're all contiguous. And here's the last step. We select the entire Bill To area like this, and we copy it using our edit options so it's added to the clipboard. And then we paste it over here on the right. That leaves us with only one problem. The two areas are now actually the same. If we enter any information on one, it will also appear in the other. We need to redefine, which is not the same as relabel, all of these fields on the right. We do that by selecting each field. We'll start with the Field button, then we choose Field. Now we change it to Ship Company, and we do the same thing, redefining all the remaining fields. Now our billing and shipping information are in fact independent, though they're identical in appearance. Finally, we give Ship To its own title. Now, we need to conceal the names. We'll select all these data fields as a group and change them simultaneously. We'll use the right mouse button and the property inspector, and when we get to field type, we click to remove the check in the Display Field Name option. And now we'll remove the outline borders. The final result is that we have our fields next to our text objects with the labels hidden, leaving a clear area for displaying information as we saw in our runtime demo. Incidentally, in cases where all objects of the same kind on the form share a property, you may want to change the defaults for the object itself up on the menu bar. To do this, you point to the object on the object bar and click the right mouse button. You'll remember from our runtime demo of order that this first field, company, is a selection list field. Now let's see how we create this kind of field. We enter a name in this field by selecting it from a selection list that's automatically generated from our customer database. Remember, we can either select a name from the list, or we can go click the New Customer button and go to the customer form. For now, we need to define the field type for customer field as a selection list field. So we point to it and click the right mouse button, choose field type, and then in the field type dialog box, we click on selection list in the selection method column and click OK. Since this will later be connected to a database, we want our selection list to be generated automatically. So we just click OK in the Expected List dialog box. Okay, we just finished designing all of this header information here. What should we do next?
We need to add a table where the parts and prices are.
That's great. Now let's take a look at this as a reminder. Here's our table with 7 columns and 7 rows and labels at the top of each column. Now let's look at our form. Any suggestions?
Sure, use the table icon.
I was hoping you'd say that. So we click on it, and now we name the table. Usually the name would show, but we'll be hiding the name on this form, so we'll leave Table 1. Using our pointer, we'll place and size our first column. Now we grab this handle at the bottom and drag it down until we've got 7 rows. Now watch. See the right pointing handle? We drag right, and there's column 2. Repeat this step for each column, and there's the final result. Now to hide the table name, simply drag the top down using the handle so only the column headers show. Now let's add a scroll bar by right-clicking on the table and selecting Scroll Bar. Now let's select a column and click the right mouse button to see its properties. We choose Name Text, and the dialog box allows us to rename the column. So we change column 1 to item number. In a similar fashion, let's use the right mouse button to change the background color. It's easy to adjust the width of a column to be sure the name fits. Just drag the cell handle, and so on for the entire table, and here's the result. I've added fields for subtotal, tax, shipping, and total using the same procedures as our first fields on the upper right, except that we've used text labels to give them a more typical business form appearance. And that brings us to the very bottom of our form. As you'll remember from our runtime demo, 3 buttons go here to perform some special actions. It's a simple matter of clicking on the button icon, naming each button, and placing it on the form. Remember, though, that these buttons aren't complete yet. We'll add the actions to these buttons to carry out later when we talk about event trees. Now that brings us to our second form, customers. Let's take a look at it. As experienced Objectvision designers, what obvious features do you see?
Well, the whole top half is the same as the Build To and the Ship To on the order entry form. Can't we just cut and paste the whole section?
Great idea. Basically, the answer is yes. Does anybody see anything else?
The shape of the form is different. It's narrower, and Build To and Ship To are stacked, not side by side. Is there some reason?
This is great. You guys are really ready to teach this course. I'll just sit back and watch. But seriously, there is a reason for this. Remember our runtime demo? Intelligent prompting signals you to fill out each section as it's needed. The sequence is always top to bottom, left to right. Here on order entry, we just display the information. In fact, we've protected these fields on the order entry form to prevent them from accepting input. To do this, you just click the right mouse button, like this, select protection, and no override. If we arrange Build To and Ship To this way on the customer's form, what would happen?
It would go left to right, line by line.
That's right. Most people like to fill in all of the Build To information first and then move on to the Ship To section. And if the information in Ship To is the same as Build To, we should be able to just automatically duplicate it. So that's why we put one above the other. Okay, I think we're ready now to create the form. We create a narrower form. We use the Control and click the left mouse button to select each field. Then copy and paste Build To. And the same for Ship To. Now you already know how to create the rest of this form. Let's just look at one special case. Here we have the customer type field, and it's different because it's a checkbox field. It offers us a number of choices with the boxes to check. These choices compute different discounts for the different types of customers. That job is done by value trees that express the business rules for the choices, and we'll be creating them shortly in our next lesson. For now, we'll just name the field, place it, and use the dialog box to specify that it's a checkbox field here, and that will be automatically generated here. Later, when we build in our business rules using decision trees, this field will automatically generate those checkboxes for us in this area. And that just leaves these buttons that makes it easy for us to store and examine our customer information. Now, there's a lot more that you can do with the form tool than what I've shown you here. And these are some examples of applications that are included with your copy of Objectvision. You can see that there's quite a range of appearances and functions to fit any business, from insurance to banking to manufacturing, or for government or private agencies, or what have you. And if you'll spend a little bit of time in Chapter 4 of the Getting Started manual, you'll see some additional features that you'll find useful when you're fine-tuning your own applications in Objectvision. Okay, and now we get to the fun part. We've just created an application interface with two forms customized for our order entry application, and now what we need to do is to add the business rules to make our application work. As you know, these are the logical steps that make the different elements in our application do their work. Objectvision provides us with a unique visual technology to accomplish this task called decision trees. You've already created some simple decision trees and attached them to fields in the First Look book. In the example from First Look, we used a value tree to calculate the vacation earned based on years of service. This icon indicates that years of service is itself calculated based on another value tree. For a spreadsheet, we attach formulas to cells. In Objectvision, we attach value trees to fields. Their purpose is to provide calculations and logic. But Objectvision provides us with two kinds of decision trees. The second type of decision tree is called an event tree. The purpose of these decision trees is to specify actions that are triggered by events. We'll see several examples of both kinds in our order entry application. The topics we'll deal with in this lesson are covered in greater detail in Chapters 6 and 7 of the Getting Started manual. These chapters provide step-by-step instructions for creating decision trees and adding them to the fields in the order application. Now, in this presentation, we're going to concentrate on two things. The first thing we're going to examine is how the decision trees, the different kinds of decision trees used in Objectvision, work in a finished application. The second thing we're going to do is to examine how the visual tools that are provided by Objectvision help you to create those business rules for your application. So let's get started. In our last lesson, we created our application interface. Let's turn now to the finished application to see how its decision trees work. Good. Now we're looking at our familiar order entry form. Let's begin by looking at the kind of decision trees that do calculations and supply our application's logic, the value trees. If the form tool isn't opened, be sure to select it. And now let's take a look at our date field over on the right. We'll use the property inspector, and we select value tree, which can be a property of a field. And there it is. Here's an example of the simplest use of a decision tree. What we see is a single conclusion. There's the conclusion icon. And the expression we always use to give us the current date is this add function called today. You remember how it works. It fills in today's date for us automatically. This is exactly the way a spreadsheet expression works. In fact, Objectvision uses standard spreadsheet expressions and add functions to make your life easier. You probably already know the conventions for spreadsheet expressions, but let's briefly review them here. If an expression begins with a number, an operator, an @ sign, or parenthesis, it's evaluated as an expression. Otherwise, it's taken as a literal value. You'll also find these conventions covered in more detail in Chapter 6 of the reference guide. Okay, so we're on familiar territory. Now let's move on to a more complex example. Let's look at the table in which we detail the order in the lower part of the form. Here on the right is the amount column. In this case, a tree attached to the column is applied to each cell in the column on a row-by-row basis. And in fact, we'll find a value tree here. Let's use our property inspector, and there it is. Once again, we're looking at a single conclusion, but this time we're not dealing with a function. Instead, we get an expression that tells us how to calculate the amount for each item in the table. That is, quantity times price times 1 minus the discount. And since this value tree applies to every row of the table, our form will calculate each row using the corresponding item, quantity, price, and discount, employing this expression to get the amount for each row. I don't want to bore you with a lot of examples of simple conclusions. Can anybody think of a place where we might use decision trees in this application that might do something a little bit more complex? Yes, you?
When we looked at the order form, the most automated thing was the table. Any complicated trees here?
That is a real good place to look. In this table, we do some calculating as well as retrieving data from some database tables. Now, there's an example in Getting Started book that I'd like to show you. Here's the figure in Getting Started that shows the value tree that calculates the discounts in the discount column. Now, we're no longer looking at a single conclusion. The main thing I want you to notice here is that we begin a different branch for each different kind of customer. And all those branches are conditions of the customer type field. So depending on what kind of customer you are, distributor, dealer, educator, and so on, we follow a different path and calculate a different discount. Now let's open the discount field and examine the tree on the computer. Now our first condition for customer type is distributor. And following along, we see that the next thing we consider is the quantity ordered, as indicated in the quantity field. Notice how easy this is to follow. If the quantity is greater than or equal to 10, we're going to give a 40% discount, and that's the conclusion there at the end. And here's the other branch condition from quantity. Otherwise, as shown right here, we give a discount of 30%. And you can see how we use a similar strategy here for dealer and educator. The same branching structure with different values and different resulting discounts. So there are our basic objects. We've got branches and conclusions. These are based on different conditions. Using these elements, we can define a tremendous range of logical processes and perform any calculations we need. Any questions?
Yes, what exactly are the objects that create the trees? I mean, the field's already there. How do you put them together?
Fair enough. Why don't we take a look now at the tools we have for creating trees, and let's go back and look at our object bar. Here they are, two basic objects that we use for creating trees, a branch object and a conclusion object. Now here, this branch object is made up of a condition for the previous branch and the field from which the next condition will be taken. And here, the conclusion object consists of the condition of the previous field and a conclusion expression that ends this particular branch. So here in our discount tree, this conclusion expression will calculate the discount rate if this path applies and return that value to the field to which this tree is attached. And of course, this applies to each row in the discount column of our table. Now why don't we try putting this into practice a bit and see how it goes. I'm going to point to the discount column, click the right mouse button to get the property inspector, and then select value tree. Now we're ready to create the tree for discounts. We select our branch object from the object bar. Then the first field to consider will be customer type, and OK. Next we want to consider quantity, so we need another branch. So we select the branch object again, and Objectvision prompts us for the condition of customer type that gets us to that branch. I want this branch to apply to distributors. And now in the field name dialog box, we select quantity from the selection list. So we'll be calculating our discount rate based on both our customer type and the quantity ordered. Now we're ready to create our first conclusion. We click conclusion in the object bar and enter the condition of quantity for the first conclusion. We type greater than or equal to 10, press enter, and we enter the conclusion for the discount as 40%. And now we have a value tree with one conclusion. Now we click conclusion again on the object bar, and for the condition of quantity, we'll click OK to accept the default otherwise, and this time we'll enter a discount rate of 30%, which means they ordered less than 10. And there's our value tree for our first customer type. To review these steps in more detail, be sure to refer to the discussion of this value tree at the end of Chapter 6 in Getting Started. Now that we have our branch for distributor in place, let's create another branch for dealers right below this one. We'll click our branch object, and there's our dialog box, and we type dealer and press enter, and for the field name, we select quantity. Our next step is to add the appropriate conclusions for dealers. If they order greater than or equal to 10, they receive a 35% discount. Otherwise, they receive a 25% discount. And now let's create the next branch for educators. But now let's use our edit commands to copy this whole section of the tree for distributor from this point on. So this section of the value tree is now on our clipboard. And now we simply paste this whole tree structure here under the new customer type we'll call educator. Of course, at this point, we not only have the same structure, but also exactly the same values. But fixing that's easy. We just use our right mouse button in Property Inspector, or we can simply double-click on the conclusion and change this first conclusion from the original 40% to 50%. And likewise, we change the otherwise conclusion from 30% to 40%, just like that. Nothing like a little labor-saving innovation here. Incidentally, while I'm on that topic, I'd like to return now to the other form in our order application, our customers form. And I'd like to point out something I think you'll find very interesting. Here's the customer type field, which we created as a checkbox in our previous lesson. You may recall my saying that the checkbox choices in the field are automatically generated. Now notice that the new customer types we've just added, distributor, dealer, and educator, have automatically been added by Objectvision into the field as new checkboxes. In fact, the branch conditions for different customer types we've just been creating in our value tree are what determines the automatic generation of checkboxes in this field. While we're still looking at the customers form, there's one more field that's worth special attention. It's the field just below that deals with tax-exempt status of our customers. Remember the intelligent prompting we saw in that field? If a customer is tax-exempt, Objectvision will prompt us to supply the tax-exempt number. If the customer isn't tax-exempt, Objectvision will place a null string into the tax-exempt field and move on to the next field. Here's the value tree that supplies that logic. This type of tree structure, which ends in a conclusion, which is the same field as the one to which the tree was originally connected, is called a self-referencing tree. Such trees are used in any case where the value of a field may not always come from the tree. They may result in the user being prompted to fill in a value. So we've now covered one of the two basic kinds of decision trees we can use in Objectvision. Let's take a moment to see what kinds of tasks we can accomplish using the second kind of tree, the event tree. To do that, we need to return to our completed order entry form. Let's begin with that new customer button and see how it works. We select the button and open the Property Inspector and choose Event Tree. And here we can clearly see the event that triggers the action of this tree, the clicking of the button. And we can also see here at the conclusion that two actions occur as a result. The function @clear and customers over here, meaning the link named customers, tells us that our first action is to clear the customer's link, to blank the fields for new values. And below it, the second action, a form select, brings the customer's form forward on our screen so we can enter new customer data. So once again, we've started with a simple case, one conclusion, except that this time it's an event tree which causes actions to be taken. But I can imagine a better way that we might change this button to do something a little bit differently. What if we wanted to change an item of information about a customer without blanking the screen? Is there any way we can modify the actions caused by clicking this button to do that? Yes?
We created branches for different kinds of customers and discounts before. Can't we make a branch for different actions for an event tree?
You bet. Now everybody's going to think I handpicked my audience today, but that's exactly right. For example, let's say we want to redefine this button so we can change the information for an existing customer. We need another branch which doesn't clear the link. One conclusion would be a clear followed by a form select, just as it is, so we can enter new information. And the other conclusion would be a form select only, omitting the clear, so we can modify the current customer data. Well, let's do that now. Now watch. The first step is to select this whole area to the right, and we'll cut it so we now have a copy on our clipboard. And this is where we create our branch conditions for the conclusions. To do this, we need to test to see if the bill company field is blank or not. We'll add what we call an unrestricted branch that allows us to test bill company. It's initiated by the click event. Now we'll paste another copy of the same conclusion and just delete the clear function. And that's it. Now if the bill company field isn't blank, the otherwise branch will automatically be selected and we'll get our customer's form so we can modify the existing information. Now let me make 2 points here. First, branching can be used in event trees. And second, in order for this branching to occur, the fields must have their values in place before the event tree occurs. That is, in event trees, you won't be automatically prompted for missing field values as you are in the case of value trees. Now let's test our modification. So here we click the button on a form with a customer in the Bill To area, and here's our customer form. Notice the fields weren't cleared. We changed the contents of the address box, and finally we can press Enter if we wish to save this change, and that will in fact update the information in our database, which we'll explore in our next lesson. And with just a little bit of practice, you'll find that you can use the visual tools in Objectvision to create the business logic you need for your application. And if it doesn't work exactly the way you want it to, it's easy to go back in, make whatever changes are necessary to get it working right. Now in the next lesson, we're going to talk about the exciting area of how to connect your application up to your databases no matter what format they're in. In our last lesson, we saw how Objectvision's decision trees helped us to provide the business logic for our applications. Also earlier, we put some fields and some tables on our forms so that we could connect them to our databases. Which brings us to our third part of our Objectvision ABC, connections to data. In this lesson, we'll find out exactly how to connect to a database and some of the different ways the connections can be used. This will complete the basic design of our application. For your later review, the first part of this lesson will be covered in detail in Chapter 8 of the Getting Started Manual on creating links. It'll show you the steps that are involved in creating the 4 links that we're going to hook up to our order entry application. But then we're going to move on to some more advanced topics on creating virtual fields and database filters, which are not covered in the tutorial, but are covered in more detail in the reference manual. So we'll be getting into some of the fun stuff in this lesson. So let's get started. I'm starting out this lesson using the file order.ovd on your diskette. And now let's call up an existing order, say order number 6. And we see that our data links have supplied information that now appears on the form. Let's just see how this works. Our order application has a total of 4 links to 4 different Paradox database tables. Our first link over here is called Orders. It contains the header information for a particular order, the sales order number, contact name, phone, extension number, and date. It also contains just one item in the customer area of our form, the Bill To company name. Note that these are all names of database fields containing this information, and here we see the name of the link, Orders. And here on the form we see the Objectvision field names to which the database fields are connected. We'll see shortly how Objectvision helps us line all these things up properly. Incidentally, there's a reason for the Bill To company name being in that first link. it's used as an index field into our next table, which contains all the customer information. And the two links, orders and customers, are joined together using this common field value. As you can see, the link name in this case is customers, and the second paradox table contains the bill company name and department and shipping address, as well as the ship to information and customer type information. And here's where all that's displayed on our form, as you know. Now, why should we keep our customer information in a separate table with a separate link?
Well, that lets us store the company information one time so we can reuse it. The orders are going to be different each time, but the company information usually doesn't change. So should they be in the database table?
Exactly. That lets us use what's referred to as a normalized data structure. Now let's take a look at our third link, items. Now to begin with, this link is different because it has two index fields. It uses a combination of the sales order number and the item number in the database table, and this relationship points up the fact that this is a one-to-many link. That is, within a single sales order, we can have many items represented. And note also that the items link delivers the part number, quantity, and amount to our application. This is referred to as the primary link to a table. And that brings us to our fourth link, the parts link. In this case, our index field is the part number we just saw in the items link. And this link returns the description and price for each part. And similar to what we just noted about our customer information, this arrangement lets us store part information that doesn't usually change, the description and the price, in its own database table. And that's our fourth link and our fourth paradox table. This link is referred to as the secondary link to the table. Remember, the items link was the primary link. We'll discuss the primary and secondary links later on in this lesson. So our links to data are all set out neatly for us. Our next step is to actually create these links from scratch. To do that, we'll remove the finished application from our workspace and start out with the one that doesn't have these links in place yet. You'll find that file on your sample diskette. Its name is order8.ovd. So now we're looking at our order application with everything in place except the four links. To create our first link, we select our Links tool from the object bar, and we get our first dialog box called Data Links. As you can see, Paradox is already checked on the right. If it weren't, we'd select it now. And next we press the Create button to create a new link. Here we see the Paradox Link Creation dialog box, allowing us to name the link. We'll call it Orders. To help us find the database we want, we can click the Search button. We want to use the existing table, Orders. Of course, the name of the link in the database table could be different. Now I'll select OK, like this, and we see that it's entered now in our Link Creation dialog box as the Paradox table. So now we can click Connect to begin the process to connect to that table. And that gives us a display of our database structure, or the database fields here. And to the left, we see a column for the Objectvision write links, and to the right, a column for the read links, and further to the right, a scrolling list of all the Objectvision fields. Now we want to establish a connection between database fields and Objectvision fields. For example, to connect the database field order number to our application field sales order, we find sales order in the Objectvision fields column and double-click on it. That automatically makes the connection. Now we can continue to make the other connections we want. Date in the database should be connected to date in the application, and so on until we've connected up all the desired fields. And now our connections for this link are complete, so we can click OK. And then we have an opportunity to choose the automatic creation of buttons, which we don't need since we've already put buttons on our order entry form. And that returns us to the Link Creation dialog box. So that's the basic procedure. We've completed one of the four links now, and we're ready to move on to the second, and that would be our Customers link. And we begin by clicking Create and enter Customers, and then we search for our Customers Paradox table, and there is one, Customers. It's spelled a little differently because of the DOS limit of 8 characters in a file name. So we select that table name, click OK, and connect to it. And there's the structure of our customer table. This time we'll speed up the connection process by clicking the Defaults button. With the Defaults button, Objectvision matches the database field names to Objectvision field names whenever an exact match occurs. So we're left with several fields we have to connect manually: bill company, bill department, bill zip extension, ship company, ship department, and tax exempt number, so we connect them. And click OK. And we don't need any buttons, so we click OK. So here again is our Data Links dialog box. And notice this time that customers and orders, the two links we've created so far, are now visible in the links box. So why don't we go test what we've done so far? I'm going to enter a 1 in the sales order column, and notice that it brought up both the sales order header information and the customer information. Now let's try a different sales order to see how the data changes. Now we've created 2 of our 4 links. Our next link, items, requires some additional features. To begin with, we follow exactly the same procedures as we did with orders and customers. So we click Create, and then we name our link. We search to find our paradox table for items, select it, and click OK. Now back in the link creation dialog box, we click Connect and Defaults, which leaves us 4 fields to connect manually: order number, number, part number, and quantity. And now comes the interesting part. Remember that this is the part of our application that has a one-to-many link. We have many items in a single order. To properly manage that relationship, we need to do a few things that are a little bit more advanced, and those advanced features are found here behind the Options button. This gives us the Optional Link Capabilities dialog box. First, we'll select Auto Insert and Auto Update. This ensures that when we enter a new record in the items table and press Enter to move on to the next record, the first record will be automatically inserted in our database table. Auto Updates assures that changes made to records will be reflected automatically as well. But there are some other important options we must use for this one-to-many link. To start, click the Locates option. Using our Locate Indexes dialog box, we want to locate the first item number based on the sales order number. So I'll double-click on Sales Order in the Objectvision Fields list. Furthermore, we want to keep the Auto Locate default, which means that when we enter a new sales order number, we'll automatically locate to the first item for that order. But we also want another option selected here, Restricted Range. We'll click it at the bottom. This option is very important for this link. It specifies that we will only see the items for a particular order number that we've entered. Otherwise, the table would be filled with all the items stored, beginning with the one we entered. And now that done, we can click OK, and we also OK our optional link capabilities. Next, we need to disconnect the read link for the order number field. To do this, we select Not Connected from the Objectvision Fields list, point to Sales Order in the Objectvision Read column, and double-click it. We did this to avoid an ambiguity, so we don't read the order number from 2 different databases. Now we can click OK on our link creation dialog box. We don't need any buttons, and that completes our first 3 links. Now all that remains is our 4th link. But let's take a look at our diagram for a moment. As you can see, we have a one-to-many relationship here in the items link that allows us to relate any number of items to a single order number. And here in our 4th link, we're retrieving information on parts that go with those items. So the question is, how does Objectvision allow us to maintain that relationship? And of course, as we'll see here, it ends up being quite easy. So let's create that 4th link. So our link name is Parts. We have a paradox table, which happens also to be named Parts, and we connect and click Defaults. In this case, everything links up except for 2 fields. We'll manually connect the part number field, and we'll leave the bitmap until a little later in this lesson. Now let's click Options. And here in the Links Capability dialog box, we can see that Objectvision has already done something about the items and parts relationship we were discussing. Here in the status area, we can see that Objectvision has set up a primary and a secondary link relationship for us, with parts being our secondary lookup link. The result is that when a part number appears in the part number column of our order entry form, the parts link will automatically fill in the part description and price. As I mentioned before, the items is the primary link to this table. Objectvision automatically classifies all the links we create according to how they're connected. A primary link is the first link that's connected to a column in a table. It delivers the multiple records required by the table. A secondary link is any link to a column in a table that already has a primary link. The secondary link provides the values for each table row after the primary link values are already in place. Before we move on, I'd like to mention an important feature that we won't be covering in this lesson, and that's the ability to create new database tables. That's covered in more detail of Appendix A of the Getting Started manual and also in the First Look booklet. All of our examples so far have involved linking Objectvision fields to existing Paradox database fields. But Objectvision also has the ability to create database tables from scratch. That's because Objectvision includes a Paradox engine, a DBase engine, and a btrieve engine as a standard capability of the product. That means that you can create a database file in any of these standard formats without the external database application even being available. All of these files are completely standard and can be shared with the database application anytime it's available. Now that covers the basics of the link capabilities. As I mentioned earlier, we're now going to move into some of the more advanced topics in the link capabilities, and the resource for that is covered in the Objectvision reference manual and on the sample lessons diskettes. On these diskettes, we've created some extended order entry applications that show off these advanced features of Objectvision's links. The first topic I'd like to discuss is virtual fields. A virtual field doesn't actually exist as stored data in a database table, but it supplies information to an application just as if it were a database field. Instead, the virtual field calculates the value it supplies using data already available to it from the application. It does this through a virtual field expression. That means that only the expression exists, not a physical field in the database. So the field is indeed virtual, and its values are never saved in the database. The advantages to this approach are access time and disk storage space that normally would be required for storing and retrieving data in database tables. For our first step, we need the link tool. And here in the items link, we're going to remove the link between amount on the form and the Paradox data field called amount. We just select it and then double-click the Not Connected option. So our original connections are removed and the amount field will no longer be required in the database. The next step in replacing the old field with a virtual field is to click on the Options button, and we select vField from the Options dialog box, and that produces the Virtual Fields dialog box. We'll give our field a name, vAmount, and tab to the Field Expression area. There we'll enter our expression, plus, which indicates this is an expression, the name of the field, quantity, which we select from the Field Names list, times price, times 1 minus discount. This is exactly the same expression we used for our original value tree. And now we need to click the Add button here on the left to add this new virtual field to the list. And now that we see we have one virtual field called vAmount, we click OK and OK again. And that brings us back to the Paradox Link Creation dialog box. Now here in the Database Table field column, we can see our new virtual field. It's right here, equals vAmount. And as you guessed, that equal sign is the designator for a virtual field. At this point, we could connect it up with amount on our Objectvision form. Note we can only connect an Objectvision field as a read link, since it would be meaningless to try to write to a virtual field. I said we could connect it up because we really have a better choice. But before I explain that, let's close the Links tool so we can look at the value tree for subtotal. Since the amount field will no longer exist in the database, we need to replace it with the virtual field vAmount in the @LinkSum function for the subtotal. We click OK and close the tree tool. Now, does anybody know why I chose not to connect VAmount to the table column amount on the form? Well, there are two choices here. Let's use our property inspector to look again at the value tree that defines the calculations for the amount column. It uses the expression quantity times price times 1 minus discount, just as the expression we just entered for VAmount. We could retain this tree, or we could use the virtual field and get the same value, but with slightly different timing considerations. Remember that as we're filling in the row for each item, the values are not stored in the database until after we leave the row and the auto insert is activated. If we retain the tree for the amount field on the form, the values will be computed and displayed as soon as quantity and price are entered on the form, but are not yet in the database. This will give us what we want, and indeed, the subtotal is calculated, proving that our virtual field really does work. Our application is better designed because we've used a virtual field, and we no longer need to store the amount in the database table. So this advanced feature has a lot of practical utility. Now there's another advanced feature that you should really keep in mind because of its usefulness in application design, and that's database filters. Basically, filters allow us to create Boolean expressions that filter records before passing through to an Objectvision application. You can filter records coming from a database table to your application or vice versa. To demonstrate how this works, let's look at a small parts table we could add to our order application that would allow us to screen items we place in an order against a threshold price. We'll begin with the file named orderq.ovd on your sample diskette, which has the query form added to it. And here's our query using filters form, and we have one field called query price to fill in. So we'll fill in a value, say $100. And that fills in the table called query price table with all the parts that are equal to or greater than that price. And indeed, we end up with a fairly long list. But if we raise our threshold now to $1,000, our result changes. Only a few parts now appear. Note that the filtering process isn't sorting these items according to price. The application is still sorting the parts by part number, just as we had designed it to do. So we can see how filters make it easier to manage the ordering process. Let's see how filters are used to do these tasks. To do that, we need to open our links tool. And in our dialog box, we see we have a link called Query Link. Selecting it, we see that we have part number, description, and price linked to the corresponding Objectvision fields for read-only. Now we click on Options, and under Filters, we see that we have one filter named Filter 1, and that it's a read filter. And we can see in the filter expression box its expression, @link value of price greater than or equal to query price. So what this filter expression tells us is that the link value expression will return all the values in the column we're looking at in the database, that is, the price column, subject to the limitation of the price which we type in, our query price field. So that's the C part of our Objectvision ABC, connections to data. We've put together our own powerful order and customer management application to automate and improve our work at a high level. But before we leave our application, there's one important area we should still investigate. It's really another type of C, but in this case, it's connections to other Windows applications. And it'll let us add some extremely powerful functions to our application that you won't want to miss. In this lesson, we'll explore some more features of Objectvision that really takes advantage of the features of the Windows graphical user interface environment. And in the process, we're going to add some more enhancements to our order application. To begin with, let's look at Dynamic Data Exchange. DDE is a Windows protocol for exchanging information between applications. To demonstrate how it works, we'll add a button to our order entry form that will allow us to send a customized thank you memo when we process an order. First, we'll call up our Objectvision application. This time, I'm starting with orderv.ovd. And we'll select the form tool, and now we'll place a new button on the order entry form and call it Send Memo. Now we want to create an event tree that will launch Word for Windows when we click the button. That process will produce a thank you memo. And here's what the expression looks like. We have a conclusion that is triggered by the click event here, and the action performed is a function called addExec. This is equivalent to selecting File Run from the Windows Program Manager. And we have two arguments, our command line with the name of the application we're linking to, WinWord, and next, the path to our memo document is memo.doc. We also have to choose a show option for how we'll display that memo, and that's here, 0, which means the application will be launched in its normal window size. Now our button has logic in place, and we can return to our application to try out our enhancement. So we click Send Memo, and there's WinWord. And now our document called Memo is called up, and we see our memo from International Computer Limited being displayed. Now, while we're at it, let's take advantage of our Windows workspace to tile our two applications to make it easier to use. Our obvious next enhancement is to read that customer information we already have entered into our order entry form and paste it into our memo so it's properly addressed. The DDE function that does that for us is a DDE read link from Objectvision to WinWord. To create that link, we go into the Form tool, select the information here, our contact name, and copy it onto the clipboard. And then here in WinWord, we choose Paste Link from our Edit menu to link that information to our memo. Now, whatever name is currently on our order form will automatically be updated through this DDE link to WinWord and appear on our thank you memo when we click the Send Memo button. Now we'll create a similar link for each additional field with the customer information, the address, state, and zip code. And there's our complete memo header. As a demonstration, we'll close the Form tool and now call up Order and enter a different order number. And notice how all the information is automatically changed, and there's our updated memo ready to be printed. In your copy of Objectvision, there's an application called DDE1.ovd that demonstrates some additional DDE functions. Objectvision also has a capability to do a DDE write, which is actually called a poke, as well as DDE execute, which means that Objectvision applications can control other Windows applications or be controlled by another Windows application. This whole area is covered in more detail in Chapter 16 of the reference manual. There are still some more valuable extensions we could easily add to our application. To begin with, remember that question that came up earlier about memorizing part numbers? Now's the time to solve that problem. We'll modify our application by adding a special parts lookup form that will let us find part information instantly whenever we need it, right from within our application. Let's take a look at our screen. We'll continue on with our file called orderv.ovd, and let's design a form that will give us the part number when all we can remember is the part name. The first step is to create a new form, and we'll call this one Parts Lookup. And we'll need a table to display our parts information, so we'll use our table object, and now extend the table so we have 4 columns. Now let's rename the columns. Column 1 we'll call Number. Column 2 will be Part Description. Column 3 will be part price. And column 4 we'll call part picture. And as you've probably guessed, in a little while we'll be using another extended feature to get us that picture. And there's our table. Now I'd like to be able to transfer part information directly from our lookup table onto the main form if I want to. Any ideas on how to do that?
Couldn't we add a button that would take the information from the table and write it out to the order entry form?
You bet. Let's add a button to our parts lookup form called Enter Part and attach an event tree to it, okay? And it'll be triggered by the click event. And now we'll need a function for this button. We can use an @assign function to take the number of the part appearing in the lookup table and assign it to the part number column in our main order entry items table. And to move to the next line, we press Control and Enter. And we also need to add an @form select so we automatically return to the order entry form when we push the button. Then we should also add a second button to get us back to the order form without having to enter a part number if we don't want to. We'll just call it return. And it's the same syntax we used before for the other button. So, are we all set?
Wait a minute. How do we get the parts information into the parts lookup table? It's got to come from somewhere.
Exactly. We better take care of that little detail now. And we already know how to do it. What we're going to need here is a link from our parts database table to the lookup form. We're going to create a new link called parts info. And we've got 4 fields to account for. First, we connect part number to number in the parts lookup table. And now description connects to part description and price to part price. And finally, we need to link the file names of our parts here where we have them stored as bitmap graphics. So we're connecting bitmap to part picture. And then there's one last thing we need to add before we can demo these features. We'd better add a button on the order entry form to request the part information in the first place. So let's just do that. We'll add a button, and its name will be Select Part, and it needs an event tree with 2 functions. First, we use an @form select to get us over to the parts lookup form in response to clicking the button. Then I'll press Control Enter, and the next function we need is one that will position us at the top of our link called Parts Info. So we'll be looking at the top of the table when we open the parts lookup form. And now we really are ready to test these features out. We get our order entry form, select an order number, and go down to enter a new item. Now let's click the Select Part button. There's our parts lookup table, and here are the part descriptions. Now I'll select a part and press the Enter Part button. Notice that it's entered a part and is prompting us for a quantity. Now let's go back to our parts lookup form. Notice in your last column, we now have file names identifying our bitmap pictures of each of these parts. Now we're ready to add an exciting advanced capability to our application, the ability to call up a picture of a part. So that brings us to one of the most powerful features available under Windows. DLLs are dynamic link libraries. DLLs are programs that are written outside the scope of the Objectvision tools. You can use them to do anything you can do in a programming language, and they can be easily connected to your Objectvision application to be called. That includes pre-existing commercial applications, or special computational routines, or custom programs created by an application programmer in a language like C++, C, or Pascal. So DLLs allow us to extend the scope of Objectvision infinitely. So what we need to do now is to add a button to our parts lookup form so that when we click the button, it will trigger execution of the DLL that displays the bitmap graphic of the part. And we'll see it in a special window that will overlay a section of the form on the screen. But before we can create the call to the DLL function, we have to have a way of telling Objectvision about it. To do that, we register the function. Now, this is covered in a lot more detail in Chapter 18 of the reference manual, but for now, this is the format of the @register command we need to use. Once a function is registered as a DLL, it shows up in the Objectvision function list, and you can use it just like any other native Objectvision function. We'd like the function to be registered automatically whenever the application is opened. And it turns out opening an application is an event we can use. We can access the event tree for the entire application by pointing to the Objectvision title bar and clicking the right mouse button, selecting Event Tree. This is the event tree for the application. We're going to create a conclusion here for the open event. Upon opening our application, we want registration of two @functions to occur. The first will be an @showPart function, and the second is an @InSession function. This is the syntax to register these two specific functions. Chapter 18 of the reference manual discusses the registration process in detail. Now, in order for this registration to occur, I have to save what we've done so far and reopen the application in order to produce an open event. We've now registered our two DLL functions, showPart and InSession. The next step is to place them at the ends of the appropriate event trees. The first place we need to use one is on an event tree for the whole application to terminate the DLL when the Objectvision application closes. So we'll go back to the event tree for the application by right-clicking on the title bar and adding a conclusion for the close event. And we use the @function we just registered, @InSession, which we can now find in our function list as the conclusion of the event tree. The second placement will be on the event tree for the showPart button on our parts lookup form. And on the click event, we need the @showPart function with the argument part picture, which is the name of the field for the bitmap. And with that done, we can finally try it out. Here's our part lookup form with its table, and all we need to do is point to the part, in this case, for example, the keyboard, and there, in fact, after we press Show Part, we have our picture appearing. Before we conclude this lesson, I'd like to point out that the DLLs and bitmaps that we've been using here are included on the sample lessons diskette. Also included on this diskette is the Pascal source code, so you can see how the DLL was actually written. And you're free to use these DLLs and bitmaps in your own applications. And Objectvision's DLLs have further added the capability to let you execute Objectvision @functions from inside the DLL. So you can do things like create self-registering DLLs. And there's some examples of this in the examples that ship with the Objectvision product. So DLLs really let you expand the scope of an application infinitely, and while you have to be a programmer to write a DLL, you don't have to be a programmer to be able to use one. Well, now this brings us to our last lesson. I think this would be a good time to review a little bit about what we've covered and take a short look forward. Our objective here has been to take you to the next plateau beyond First Look, and in doing so to complement the lessons that are in the Getting Started tutorial. And now you're ready to go out and start creating your own Objectvision business applications. And I'd also like to reiterate that what we've shown you here today is a revolutionary visual approach to applications creation, and that this visual approach applies to all three elements of any business application, what we refer to as our ABC, the application interface, the business rules, and the connections to data. We started by learning about Objectvision's application interface. That is the user interface design, including handling of objects such as text, fields, buttons, and tables. And we've noted Borland's innovations in object-oriented technology. The object bar and the property inspector provide you with intuitive and easy-to-use tools. We showed you how to implement business rules using decision trees. Decision trees are unique and are at the heart of Objectvision's visual programming. We learned how to use value trees for calculations and event trees for actions. They define Objectvision's intelligent prompting. Finally, we covered connections to data. Business applications must be linked to data, and Objectvision makes it easy because data links are an integral part of the product. You can connect to Paradox, DBase, and Btree files, as well as other Windows applications. Objectvision's visual ABC approach benefits both non-programmers and experienced developers. Non-programmers because they can now develop their own powerful Windows applications. And developers benefit because now application creation under Windows has become much easier. Now, we've covered all the basics, but there really is a lot more to Objectvision. You can use it for more than just entering orders. Objectvision is a WYSIWYG product, so you know just what you'll get when you print. While designing your applications, you have access to rulers and adjustable grid settings. You can add shapes such as lines, rectangles, rounded rectangles, and even import graphics from your favorite draw program. And there's a wide range of properties available to you for flexible interface design. In the area of business rules, Objectvision offers you over 150 spreadsheet-style @functions. These include value functions for financial, mathematical, and statistical calculations, and event functions varying from menu customization and message display to printing of forms and opening other applications. You'll also find some interesting examples of ways to combine trees and intelligent prompting in a computer diagnostic and a life insurance application that are included with your copy of Objectvision. Another capability is mixed database links. That is, the way in which a single application can be connected simultaneously to a mix of different databases. Objectvision can actually do a join between DBase and Paradox database tables. And while I'm on this topic, I'd like to offer a word of caution. Database structures can become quite complex, and Objectvision has the flexibility and the options to handle a broad range of database requirements and is fully ready to deal with them. But you may need some expert help in designing some of the more complex structures. We looked briefly at dynamic data exchange operations, but there are more uses for DDE, such as connecting up to your email system. Dynamic link libraries offer you virtually unlimited capabilities to extend the scope of your Objectvision application. And Objectvision is an Olay client, so you can use it with any application that's an Olay server. Passwords let you protect your application so others can't modify them. And Objectvision has a runtime version that's included with the package, so you can distribute your applications at no additional charge. So, what's your next step? Well, first you should take a good look at the custom applications that ship with your copy of Objectvision. And you may want to spend a little bit of time in the Getting Started tutorial and the reference guide. And be sure to send in that registration card. It's what will make you eligible to receive technical support and ongoing product information from Borland. Well, I've really enjoyed showing you Objectvision today. I know you'll find it to be the easiest way to create your Windows applications. Have a great time with it.